You should be. So, tanking. I'm going to talk about like 3 points. The first part is who should be tanking. The next part is how is tanking decided and how you gear accordingly. And then I talk a little bit about how you tank the bosses. Mostly just I'm giving indicators, I'm explaining on what to do. But if I would talk about every single boss in detail, that would actually be way too long and it would waste a lot of time. So let's start with who should be tanking. Basically, any class or build can tank. It's just that some classes are better at it. So I tank regularly on my power soul beast because some people forget something. But it's not that difficult if you had a bit of training. Let's go with the meta tanks, like what is mostly used at the moment. Basically, we go back to the role compression thing again. We put the tank duty on support classes already because they are doing mechanics and healing and boons. Let them just tank as well, like easy peasy. Druid, it's a healer. You just lay there and take it, and you out heal it. Like that's it to Druid more or less. On some bosses where it's better to have a multi block, you can take Great Sword to replace staff and use your fourth skill to multi block. Okay, it's a nice thing to have, but it's not needed on every boss. Next part, Quickness Scrapper. I really enjoy tanking on Quickness Scrapper because it's literally free. It's actually free because you have consistent barrier generation on yourself when you hit a boss, and you can just take everything and it only will hit your barrier. At most of the time, never your actual health bar. And even if it does, like there are healers who can top you off a bit. You have a block on Hammer 4. The spicy part about this is it's actually affected by quickness, so you have to be really careful with timing it. Then Heal Firebrand, healer, like you have self-sustain with healing yourself, and you also have access to Aegis to block mechanics and so on. Then Quickness Chrono. I personally don't like it as a tank, but it has been the meta for a long time because you can overload the chrono with utility to a certain amount, and you have access to distortion. Distortion is a buff that makes you vulnerable for an amount of seconds, depending on whatever you do. Chrono itself has many blocks on different weapons, but you can actually multi-block with Shield 4, and you can actually multi-block twice, which is really nice. And last but not least, Quickness Firebrand is actually a bit tougher because you don't have that much self-sustain, but you still have access to Aegis, which is really strong boon. Next part. How is tanking decided? Mostly there are 3 categories. You have highest toughness, you have a mechanic that decides whoever is tanking, or you can pick up the tanking mechanic pre-fight, which is only on 2 bosses. But I personally really like that idea. So highest toughness, the boss continuously scans toughness on all squad members, and he always focuses on the squad member with the highest toughness. So, as you remember from Heal Tempest and Heal Firebrand, if you cast skills that increase your toughness and you get over the tank with toughness, the boss will turn and maybe hit squad, which is not good. So always keep that in mind on those bosses. Then mechanics, I'm going to talk about that in detail later, but it's mostly something with proximity. So if you say you're tanking there, you actually have to position yourself correctly most of the time, but some squad members control you by going closer or further than you. Keep that in mind. So, gear options. So you actually have more or less 2 ways. The easiest and cheapest way is you go to World v World and you buy a toughness infusion and you slot it into one of your armor pieces or trinkets. The thing about this is it gives you only +5 toughness. This will not always work because, for example, Power Soul Beasts have default 1150 toughness, while the other classes all have 1000. And 1005 is less than 1150. So 2 options. Either you get the other way or you kick the Power Soul Beast. The best way is you swap out equipment until you have the highest toughness. It's easy with legendary equipment, yes, but if you're new, the best option is you take one amulet that has a 3-stat prefix, and the main stat of it is toughness. Because amulet gives you 157 of the main stat, and this goes over 1150 toughness. For the record, there are builds that have even higher toughness, like for example Handkite Soulbeast or any celestial build. For if you're starting out with raiding, I would say this is enough. And the further you go, like Handkite Soulbeast is only on Deimos a thing, then you have to adjust your gear accordingly if you want to kill Deimos. And if any celestial build goes into your squad, they usually assume by themselves that they are tanking, so it doesn't matter, but I just wanted to write it down. So those are like in Guild Wars 2, the meta builds usually have 4 basic prefixes, like this is power, this is condition, this is support, and this is healer. And according to that, those are the corresponding prefixes with toughness. So Berserkers takes knights, Vipers, Railblazers, Diviners, Commanders, and Harriers, Givers, or Minstrel. Commanders and Minstrels are 4 stats prefixes. So for those 2 options, you cannot take an amulet like that. So, and then you have to calculate around a bit to go over 1150. So now I'm going to talk about the bosses a bit. For the record, when I created the slides, I was having a discussion about which bosses are easy to tank and not easy to tank. We kind of tried to rank them by difficulty. We actually talked about it for, I believe, over 2 hours. So take this with a grain of salt. It's not like the perfect ranking, but it should give you an indication. In the top right, you always see either trivial, engaging, or difficult. And now, let's go. Gorseval. Literally free to tank. Like, everyone can do it. What you have to do is, you turn the boss away from the group, and you take the hits. And the rest is out-healed, or you sustain it yourself. Like, that is basically it. A little trick you can do is, after the split phase, you stand on the opposite side of the boss than the group. So the first hit goes only onto you and not on the squad, and the squad already has flanking uptime. Like, but that's basically it for Gorseval. Next part, Sabir. Also trivial. Most people don't, or some people don't know that Sabir actually has a toughness-based tanking mechanic. But on Sabir, you want to stack, so everybody gets hit by the attack. So you gain the buffs that grant you the special action key. So mostly nobody is looking for a specific tank here, but you can kind of kite the attacks, so everybody stacks up and so on, if you get more toughness. And basically the movement is, on the 3rd platform, you chase the big tornado. Like, you chase it. Don't get chased by it. Yes? Next one, Broken King. Also trivial. The trick about Broken King is you tank it on range. Like, because the boss is doing nothing else. Unless you stand close by, so, and then get hit by the shotgun blast, which actually can down you. So just always try to stay on range, and you want to kite the boss a bit, like orientate the boss according to the green spawn. So if you see, you're tanking it into one direction, and there are 2 green fields where people have to stand in. You walk a bit around where there is free space with the green, so they can just take the green safely and don't have to be afraid of the shotgun blast. That's it to Broken King. Next part, Keep Construct. Also free. Like, there's not that much pressure on you as a tank. You just have to be at the correct positions. For that, you have to know the fight a little bit. Like, there are glowing statues, and you want to kill the projections that originate from those statues on the boss, right? So what you're going to do is, at the beginning of every 33% phase, you move to the glowing statue to the east, so that in the meantime, your squad can cleave down the projection that originates from the statue, remove the stack, wait for the second one. And that's basically it. Meanwhile, obviously do a mechanic, but the tanking itself is free on this boss. Next part, Adina. Still trivial, but you have to be a bit aware about what's happening. At first, turn the boss away from the group. Yes. There's a knockback cone that you have to dodge, block, or sidestep. It's an orange cone attack, and then you wait a bit, look a bit at the animation, and then you do one of those three. One really important thing, don't walk into the mines she summons, because they deal a lot of damage. Also, stay away from the mines when she faces, because they explode. And if you stand close to the mines, you down, and then she summons this one-shot beam, and then if you not get rest in time, you're dead, and there's no tank. So this is the spicy part about Adina. So, Sloth. Sloth is a more difficult boss, but the tanking itself is also trivial, because you only have to be aware of the tank swap. Like when the tank swap appears, you have to notice it that you're the tank, and then you just move along the path that is getting eaten by the slapling. Obviously, sidestep the fire breath, but you have to deal with all the mechanics. Next part, Samarog. Really easy if you know the boss, because you can actually look at the animations and then act accordingly, because they have a really long tail. To sum Samarog up, turn the boss away from the group and always move to the back of Samarog when an animation starts. Because when an animation starts, the boss is locked into it and it won't turn around. When the animation finishes, you just walk in front again. This is what you're doing as a tank on Samarog. Also trivial, right? So, Mursaat Overseer. Okay, let's talk about what you're supposed to do. You turn the boss away from the group so people can flank. You move off a tile that has spear indicators on it. You never leave the 4 inner tiles. And you always claim the inner 4 tiles. This is what you basically have to do as a tank on MO. You also want to have a claim ready when a soldier is approaching, because the soldiers reclaim it and then you have a lot of damage pressure. In theory, this is really easy. But if something goes wrong, then it goes to shit in like a few seconds. If you don't move correctly and claim correctly at that point, the run is dead, okay? I can just tell you, this is what you want to do, and the rest is just getting a bit of experience. Also, if the DPS of your group is low, then it gets also more difficult, right? Yes, that's MO. Next one, Eater of Souls. Also, like, rather trivial to tank, but we called him the hardest hitter in the game. Like, one punch of that guy and whoo, spicy. So, what you want to do is turn the boss away from the group again. You have to be aware of the puke attack. The puke attack is always targeted at the closest person to the boss that is not the tank. Okay? The skeletons that are spawning around also hit hard as well. So the solution to this is you take him on a walk unless your squad wants or has to hit the boss, right? Because that's it. But if you stand still and you don't have to sustain and healing and so on, you take a lot of damage. So, next part, Deimos. Turn the boss away from the group. It's best if you are able to block attacks, like the pizza attack and the mine crush. It's not really needed, but it's better for your squad, especially for pizza, because if you dodge and then move not in time back after the pizza, the boss moves and so on and so on and so on. The next part is kiting the boss because of the oils. I just gonna assume that everybody knows the oil mechanic, and how you deal with it is you start moving the boss at 65% of its health out of the center, because you need the center free for the mine crush bubble or when you're coming back from hell. So this results that the oil spawn does not spawn in the center. If an oil spawns, you move away. And then you just rotate, you basically rotate around the center. And that's basically it to Deimos. Just watch out for the hand cutter. So the hand cut is on the opposite side of the boss. But that's basically Deimos. It's just a bit spicy because of the oil. because the oil is actually a run killer. So, next part, Dhuum. Dhuum is the tanking itself of Dhuum is just learning the pattern and moving accordingly. Tanking Dhuum is free in itself, but Dhuum itself is like the encounter, and everybody's a bit like afraid, and if something goes wrong, then snowballs a bit, and so on and so on. I tried to find a better picture where the tanking actually goes here, but I couldn't find one. So let's talk a bit about this tanking. This is wall tanking. Throne tanking is also an option, but I leave that out for a beginner introduction. You want to start here, and then you wait for the first dip at 705. And then, if you're not taking a green as a tank, you can just go here. If you have to take a green, you have to go here, because this is the green you take at the next point, right? Otherwise, it's a normal Dhuum fight, and you do the same as a DPS. The only spicy part about this is after a soul split, like your positioning. Most of the time, your squad is here, and you want to position yourself here. But there's this orange AoE in the center that actually hits a lot, and you have to time it correctly to be here when the soul split ends, but not getting pulled in and downing. Because then the boss turns around and swings his scythe through the whole stack, which is like not very healthy. After this point, you can go here, but if you're taking a green again, you actually wait in the center. No, you always wait in the center after soul split. Wait for the first dip, and then if you take the green, you have to go here, because then this green will be up soon. Like 5:45 is the small dip, and at 5:30 you have to take the green. And then go on, move along, soul splits, and then it just repeats. So Dhuum is more or less just learning the pattern, right? And being aware of the soul split.
Can I
So
mention something?
go ahead.
So for Dhuum, generally speaking, Dhuum hits you like a wet noodle. He does no damage to
Yeah.
the tank, but it hits everyone else really, really hard. So because you have a buff that makes Dhuum auto attack itself do no damage to you, the circles that Dhuum spawns with the auto attacks is not mitigated by this buff, which means you take normal damage from the circles that spawn with the auto attack. So as a tank, the main thing you do when tanking and you down from damage, the only reason where you down from damage and it's your fault is if you soaked circles. Otherwise, it's the healer's fault if you ever down, or the bomb's fault.
Yep, thank you. Next part. Twin Largos. Twin Largos has two bosses. Let's start with Kenut. Kenut is female Largos. It's on the second platform and on the right side. Basically, turn the boss away from the group and try to tank in the center at first. But if tornadoes force you out of your current position, you want to position yourself behind the last tornado. It sounds a bit weird, but this is your rule of thumb. Tornadoes can actually be predicted with moving. They get more or less reflected from the edges of the platform, and they rotate clockwise. So you want to rotate clockwise as well, if that makes sense. But this is basically Kenut. There's still the shockwave and the tormenting attack that you have to take care of. And she also hits decently hard, so be aware of that. Next part, Nikare. This is the male Largos. Nikare is on the first platform and on both platforms on the left. Basically, it's evade all the mechanics that are present in a boss fight. So, not much to talk about it. But there's one way to deal with the dashes. The dashes work the following. Nikare dashes 3 times. The first one targets the furthest person away. The second, at beginning of the cast, targets the furthest person away at the beginning of the second dash, or before the second dash. and the third dash is always onto the tank. Always. So if you're good with it, or what you actually should do is you ignore the first dash, but you want to bait the second dash, and then you take the third dash automatically. This build should explain it a bit better. Like you have the boss here, this is the stack, this is the tank. First dash, the squad steps away, you go away from the boss. Therefore, you're baiting the second dash and the third. So what you're achieving with this is the third dash should never go through the stack. If it goes through a few people, then those are trolling because they are not with the stack, okay? And after that, you basically just go back to getting hit by and all that stuff. It needs a little bit of training, but if you can manage it, it's really and takes a lot of pressure off of the squad itself. So, next part, UTP. This is based on a mechanic who is tanking. The first person with an activated special action key that goes inside the center circle is the tank. Otherwise, you have to deal with more or less with two mechanics mostly. The first one is the auto attack. That's called Either Strikes into Reign of Chaos. It's actually a lot of damage that is going on to you. This is why Snap was saying this is a boss where you should or could take Minstrel because it just hits so much. Otherwise, you want to position yourself to bait the road. Those roads or carpets sometimes, if you walk into them, they deal a lot of damage and they will persist for a decent amount of time. You just want to position the roads between the pickup point and the pylons. Also, as a fellow North pylon kiter, please don't position the boss straight to the North pylon in the beginning because you will hit the North pylon kiter and he will get really mad. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, yes. But otherwise, there's just a lot of damage pressure onto you, and if you put down a road wrong, that's at least spicy to say the least, but it's not a run killer. So, this is our last engaging boss, Xera. The tanking itself is easy, but the kiting or movement is actually the difficult part. Because at Xera you can skip certain mechanics by DPS, and therefore you should know when some stuff happens and move accordingly. Like, you have this tanking guide, like what it tells you in the first phase and the second phase. In our static, we just stay at arrow because our DPS is so like it's not good, but it's good enough. Let's face it like that. The thing is about this, if you're tanking this, you should know what to do. Like it's it sounds a bit stupid, but you should know like what you have to do in emergencies, like move accordingly, because this purple thing means this half is covered in this AoE, and in the center is a laser, and then you have to be outside. But basically, it's nothing more than follow this plan, okay? But sometimes you skip the part, so it doesn't matter, okay? This about the kiting. Too long that read is move out of the middle when you see the laser spawning, move back into the middle when the laser despawns. About the tanking itself, Xera has one attack that puts you in a bit of dangers if you're tanking with, for example, low toughness and without barrier. It's called Blood Frenzy. It's the sword 2 attack of the Chrono. When she casts this, she is locked in position, but not in orientation. So that means don't walk through the boss when she does it, because then she will hit the entire group, and that is not really funny. You want to deal with this by walking out of range, like away from her and away from the stack, or you just multi-block it enough, right? But otherwise, that's Xera and nothing more to talk about it. So we have 3 difficult bosses. First one, Qadim 1. It's a bit spicy. You can tank the boss itself, but it's more difficult to tank the ads that you're supposed to tank. Like, At the first, like before you fight the boss itself, you have to fight an ad, and then every 33% you have to fight ads as well. In the slides, I have linked videos to those bosses because it's best if you see the animations and from then you act accordingly. I'm going to explain the basics of all the bosses that they have in common, but I won't go too much into detail. The first part is like obviously you want to turn the boss away from the group, but you're fighting the bosses on triangle. And every once in a time, there are 3 lava fields or meteors that create lava fields, and they are positioned at towards the corners between the ledges. It's hard to describe, but basically, I don't have paint. It's towards the corners, and therefore you want to tank them into the center and 120 degrees away from the group. Okay, it's hard to explain for me in Inglando, but if you see the videos, it's obvious. Just not 180 degrees, but 120 degrees. Okay. Then every boss has the same attack pattern: hit, hit, special attack, and then hit, hit, special attack, and then hit, hit, teleport. Then they repeat it. The teleport means they teleport into another platform, right? Another thing to keep in mind, on the first special attack, this one, of the second rotation, every ad will have a teleport AoE beneath it that teleports you to Qadim. This happens, like, as I said, on the first special attack of the second rotation, or you can describe it as it happens when Qadim destroys the platform he's on. So that means he is about to destroy the platform he's on, and you're getting teleported to him, and then you have to run immediately off the platform, okay? This teleport has an indicator like the golden border, as on VG or Can. Like, just walk out. Important, all bosses are proximity based, so you have to be more or less inside the hitbox, and at that point you have to go out. So, Hydra, bite fire, bite CC, bite teleport, heat. Like, that's that. All of the Hydra bites can actually be sidestepped. You can either actually sidestep them to the side, or you can move through the hitbox across the Hydra. The thing is, you have to be really careful with the timing, because if you turn her onto the squad, lots of damage, and we don't want that. Okay. Next part. You have to destroy her. I would say this one is rather trivial. Like, don't stand in the AoEs, and you dodge the shockwaves he's creating by the special attacks. At the beginning, there will be ads. You want to stay in the center until they are also close to the center, so the others can cleave them down. But otherwise, it's just standing there, sidestepping the AoEs from the auto attack, and so on and so on. Then there will be 2 wyverns at 33% of Qadim. The cheesy way is you camp inside of the hitbox, because then the paths you have to take are short and you can easily tank the wyvern. The summary of the tanking is you sidestep the swipe attack a bit to the right. Quick PSA, the swipe is this hit thingy I've talked before. The first swipe, like as in the first hit, has an indicator. The second swipe looks the same. At the beginning, there's a little thing at the end that we ignore for now, but there are no indicators. So at that point, you have to look at the animation and move accordingly a bit to the right inside the hitbox to not get hit. The special attacks are just Flame Breath, Ring Flap, and there's also a CC, and you just sidestep them by going onto the other side of the wyvern. At some point, someone will still show up, and then he will tank the wyverns. Be careful about that. He's not a good tank. You have to dodge. Everybody has to dodge, just so you know. And as I said, with the PDFs, there will be links to the bosses. So, next part, Vale Guardian. Just as all the bosses, or most of the bosses, turn the boss away from the group. And then as a tank, you have to take care or deal with the blues, and you have to deal with the punches when the greens explode. Because the punch is actually pretty tough. And if you got hit by a green, unless you are able to deal with it with distortion, for example, on a chrono, you actually have to deal with the punch by either dodging or blocking it, right? That about the green and the punches. The other part are the blues. We had a little discussion about it already. Blues can overlap, and if you, for example, only have Aegis or a single block, you will get ported if they overlap and you can't block enough. Okay, 3 options. Distortion, only on Chronos. Multi-block, you can, like, for example, shield 4 on Chrono. Or you dodge backwards into the wall if you're wall tanking. You have to time it a bit, but it's the best you can do at that point. It will move the boss a little bit, but that's the cost they have to pay. That you're taking on something else in Chrono or something without a multi-block. That's it what you have to deal with while being at some position. The next part is the moving actually. In the second phase, you only swap between those two things, like you start here, and then after 40 seconds, you move over. Because one tile is activated for 20 seconds. So it starts here, and then 2 times 40 is in my books 40. And then you move over there, because then this is activated. In the third phase, you want to start here, like in the middle of the line that separates them, and then you just move to this, because then your pass is possible on the other side. Obviously, start here. So, last boss, Soulless Horror. Soulless Horror actually has 2 tanks, and it works the same way tanking mechanic-wise as with MO. There are 2 runes, and then 2 people have to pick them up. If you don't pick them up and you jump in, yeah, you're dead, because the game won't let you in. The thing is, everybody, like both of the tanks, get a special action key, and they can swap the tanking between them. The special action key obviously has a cooldown, and your goal is to, again, I forgot to mention the necrosis. The thing is, while tanking, you gain stacks of necrosis, and this will increase the damage you take. So you can only survive so much damage. So at some point, you have to swap the tanking, and you do that by the off tank presses the special action key. You should press the special action key either when your own stacks run out or the other tank is at around 3 stacks. Okay? This is the rule of thumb on how to swap the tanking. Another mechanic that concerns the tanking is the off tank. Off tank, as in the guy who is currently not tanking SH, actually has the aggro of the golems that spawn in the center, right? Just a little thing to know. Otherwise, it's just sidestep the mechanics, don't walk into flame walls, yada yada, just play the boss mechanics. But the coordination is something that if you're not coordinating good enough, it can actually kill the tank. Because if you press it at the same time and the guy just gets it back again and already has 3 stacks and then has, I don't know, at 1.7 stacks, that actually hurts a lot, and that might be a run kill. Or if one of the tanks dies, then one of the tank has to take all the necrosis stacks. And yeah, that's really, really funny. If both tanks die, all the people get necrosis stacks, and then it gets more difficult for everyone. This is actually it from my side.